The stars looked cold and distant from the bridge of the massive ship floating in deep space. Commander Zexthul stood before the great viewing window, his 6 arms folded behind his back. His purple skin gleamed under the ship's blue lights. Behind him, dozens of his crew worked at their stations, their claws clicking against metal controls. The Kethavari had ruled the galaxy for over 3,000 years. They had conquered worlds, destroyed empires, and made slaves of countless species. Their technology was beyond anything most races could imagine. Their ships could cross vast distances in days. Their weapons could crack planets in half. Their probes could study entire civilizations without being seen. "Commander," said Officer Vexmar, approaching with quick steps. "The probe is ready for launch." Zexthul turned around slowly, his 4 eyes focused on the smaller alien. "Show me the target again." A hologram appeared in the air between them. A small blue and green planet spun slowly in the light. It looked peaceful and quiet. White clouds swirled around its surface. One small moon circled around it. "Planet designation, Sol 3, Vexmar said. "Third planet from a yellow star. The locals call it Earth. Population, approximately 8 billion primitive beings. Technology level, extremely low. They have only just begun to leave their planet's surface." Zexthul studied the image. This world looked like so many others they had found. The beings living there probably still fought with simple weapons. They likely knew nothing about the vast universe around them. They would be easy to conquer when the time came. "What do we know about these humans?" Zexthul asked. "Very little, Commander. Long-range scans show they are a young species. They appear to be in their early industrial age. They use crude rockets to reach their moon. They communicate with simple radio waves. Our analysts believe they pose no threat to the Empire." "True," Commander nodded. This was how it always began. First, they would send a probe to study the new world. The probe would learn about the aliens' technology, their governments, their military strength. Then the Empire would decide what to do next. Sometimes they would trade with the new species. Sometimes they would ignore them. Sometimes they would conquer them. "Seeker Prime is our most advanced reconnaissance unit," Vexmar continued. "It can analyze an entire civilization without being detected. The probe will observe these humans for several cycles, then return with a complete report." Seeker Prime was indeed special. The crystalline device was the size of a small building, but it could make itself invisible to almost any detection system. Its artificial mind was smarter than most living beings. It could think, learn, and make decisions on its own. The probe had studied hundreds of worlds and had never failed to bring back useful information. Far away on the blue planet, Dr. Paul Martinez sat in front of a wall of computer screens. The Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico was one of Earth's most powerful radio telescopes. Paul had worked there for 15 years, listening to signals from space. Most nights, he heard nothing but the natural sounds of stars and planets. But tonight felt different. "Lisa, come look at this," Paul called to his colleague. Dr. Lisa Thompson walked over carrying a cup of coffee. She was tired after working for 12 hours straight, but Paul's voice sounded excited. "What is it?" she asked. Paul pointed at one of his screens. Numbers and graphs moved across it in green lines. "I'm picking up something strange. Look at this signal pattern." Lisa studied the data. She had a PhD in astrophysics and had spent years studying radio signals from space. Most signals they detected came from natural sources like pulsars or quasars, but this signal was different. "The frequency is shifting in a very regular pattern," she said. "Almost like it's, artificial." "That's what I thought too," Paul said. "But look at the power output. Whatever is sending this signal must be enormous." The 2 scientists stared at the screen. The signal was getting stronger by the hour. That meant whatever was sending it was getting closer to Earth. "We need to call Jake," Lisa said quietly. Jake Collins worked at NASA's Planetary Defense Office in Washington, D.C. His job was to watch for asteroids or other objects that might threaten Earth. But lately his department had been given a new responsibility: watching for signs of alien life. Paul's phone call woke Jake up at 2 in the morning. "Jake, we need you to see this," Paul said. "We've detected something entering the solar system. It's not natural." Jake sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "Are you sure?" "The signal is artificial, no doubt about it. And Jake, it's heading straight for Earth." 20 minutes later, Jake was in his car driving to the office. As Director of Planetary Defense, he had protocols to follow when something like this happened. He had to notify the military, the president, and several international agencies. But first he needed to see the data for himself. Meanwhile, millions of miles away, Seeker Prime moved silently through space toward the blue planet. The probe had no emotions, but if it could feel anything, it might have felt curious about this new world. Its sensors were already detecting radio signals coming from the planet's surface. The beings down there were definitely intelligent. The probe's crystalline mind began processing the information. These humans seemed to use electromagnetic radiation for communication. They had artificial satellites in orbit around their planet. Some of these satellites appeared to be for communication, others for observation, and some for navigation. Seeker Prime noted that the humans had divided their planet into separate territories. The probe detected different languages, different governments, and different military forces. This was typical for primitive species. Most young civilizations were fragmented and often fought among themselves. As Earth grew larger in the probe's sensors, Seeker Prime prepared for the next phase of its mission. It would enter the planet's atmosphere and begin close observation of human society. The probe's stealth systems would make it invisible to human detection. It would study their cities, their technology, their military capabilities, and their social structures. Then it would return to the Empire with its report. Based on that report, the Kethvari would decide the fate of humanity. The probe adjusted its course slightly and began its descent toward Earth. Behind it, the cold stars watched silently as another world prepared to meet the galaxy for the first time. Seeker Prime entered Earth's atmosphere like a ghost. Its stealth technology bent light around its crystalline form, making it invisible to human eyes and most of their detection equipment. The probe descended through the clouds over the Pacific Ocean, its sensors drinking in data about this strange new world. The first thing that surprised the probe was the complexity of human settlements. From space, the cities had looked simple and primitive, but up close, they were intricate networks of roads, buildings, and infrastructure. Millions of humans moved through these cities every day, following patterns that seemed chaotic but somehow worked. Dr. Amy Foster sat in her office at MIT, staring at her computer screen with growing confusion. Amy studied languages for a living, but lately she had been tracking something that made no sense. Global internet traffic showed tiny delays that shouldn't exist. It was as if something was copying and analyzing vast amounts of human data in real time. "Ryan, you need to see this," Amy called to her colleague down the hall. Ryan Clark was an expert in cybersecurity. He had spent years fighting hackers and protecting computer networks from attack. When Amy showed him her data, his face went pale. "This looks like the biggest hacking operation in history," Ryan said. "But I've never seen anything like this pattern. Whatever is doing this has access to systems all over the world simultaneously." "Could it be a foreign government?" Amy asked. Ryan shook his head. "No government has this kind of capability. This is beyond anything we've ever seen." While Amy and Ryan tried to understand what they were seeing, Seeker Prime continued its systematic study of humanity. The probe positioned itself high above major population centers, using its advanced sensors to observe human behavior. The first thing the probe noticed was how humans seemed to waste enormous amounts of energy on activities that served no survival purpose. In New York City, the probe watched thousands of humans gather in large buildings to watch other humans pretend to be different people on a stage. The probe's databases had no reference for this behavior. In Paris, the probe observed humans creating elaborate sculptures and paintings that had no practical function. Some humans would stare at these objects for long periods, showing signs of emotional arousal. The probe could not understand why humans would spend time and resources creating things that did not help them survive or reproduce. Captain Steve Hayes stood on the bridge of the USS Defiant. studying sonar readings that
made no sense.
his ship was investigating reports of electronic anomalies in the Pacific Ocean. Several civilian vessels had reported strange malfunctions in their navigation equipment. "Captain, we're getting more reports," said Lieutenant Commander Kate Murphy. "Fishing boats, cargo ships, even some of our own naval vessels are experiencing unexplained interference." Steve had been in the Navy for 20 years. He had served in conflicts around the world and had never seen anything like this. The electronic interference appeared and disappeared without warning. It affected different types of equipment in ways that seemed random. Marine Colonel Beth Turner joined the investigation team. She was an expert in foreign military technology and suspected that another country might be testing new weapons in international waters. Could be the Chinese or Russians, testing some kind of electronic warfare system, Beth told Steve during a briefing. "But the interference pattern doesn't match anything in our databases." The probe, meanwhile, was having its own problems understanding human military behavior. Seeker Prime had observed thousands of alien species, and most followed predictable patterns. They fought over resources, territory, or mates. Their military strategies were based on logical principles of gaining advantage over enemies. Human military behavior was different. The probe watched a group of soldiers in Afghanistan risk their lives to evacuate wounded civilians from a bombed hospital. From a tactical perspective, this made no sense. The civilians were not their allies and could provide no military advantage, yet the soldiers acted as if saving these strangers was more important than their own safety. In another location, the probe observed human police officers. These humans were armed and had authority over other humans, yet they often used their power to help rather than dominate. The probe watched a police officer in Detroit spend his own money to buy food for a hungry family. This behavior violated every principle of power dynamics that the probe understood. Dr. Paul Martinez and his team at Arecibo had been tracking the mysterious object for 3 days. They still couldn't see it directly, but they could detect its gravitational effects on satellites and other objects in orbit. "It's definitely artificial," Paul told Jake Collins during a secure video call. "Whatever this thing is, it's using technology we don't understand. It can make itself invisible to most of our sensors, but we can track it by watching how it affects other things." Jake had spent the last 3 days briefing government officials and military leaders. The initial reaction had been skepticism, but the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. "How big is it?" Jake asked. "Based on its gravitational signature, it's roughly the size of a city block," Lisa Thompson answered. "But it masses like it's made of something much denser than any material we know." The probe continued its observations, moving from city to city like an invisible tourist. In Tokyo, it watched humans pack themselves into crowded trains every morning and evening, yet they maintained complex social rules that prevented conflict. The probe noted that humans could cooperate in large groups without the rigid hierarchy systems used by most species. In London, the probe observed something that truly puzzled it. Humans had created institutions dedicated to preserving knowledge and art from the past. Museums and libraries served no immediate survival purpose, yet humans spent significant resources maintaining them. Some humans devoted their entire lives to studying ancient history or extinct languages. The probe's analytical systems began to encounter errors when it tried to categorize this behavior. Most species only preserved information that had practical value. Why would humans waste resources on knowledge that had no apparent use? In Lagos, Nigeria, the probe watched street vendors who helped competitors when business was slow, sharing customers rather than fighting over them. In São Paulo, it observed humans creating elaborate festivals that required months of preparation, but lasted only a few days. In Mumbai, it saw humans caring for animals that provided no economic benefit. Dr. Amy Foster and Ryan Clark had been working around the clock to trace the source of the internet anomalies. They had brought in additional experts from universities and tech companies around the world. "The pattern is global," reported Dr. Susan Patel from Stanford. "Whatever is analyzing our data has simultaneous access to networks on every continent. It's like having a single observer that can be everywhere at once." "But what is it looking for?" Amy wondered. "The data being copied isn't military secrets or financial information. It's accessing everything, Social media posts, news articles, entertainment websites, educational materials, even personal blogs and family photos. Ryan pulled up a map showing the data access patterns. It's like something is trying to understand human culture by reading everything we've ever written or posted online. The probe had indeed been absorbing human digital information at an incredible rate. Its crystalline memory banks were filling with human literature, music, films, and personal communications. But instead of providing clarity about human nature, this information was creating more questions. Human stories made no logical sense to the probe. They were filled with characters who made irrational decisions based on abstract concepts like love, honor, and justice. Heroes in human stories often sacrificed themselves for others, sometimes for complete strangers. Villains were often defeated, not through superior force but through the power of hope and determination. The probe tried to dismiss these stories as fantasy, but then it observed humans acting out similar behaviors in real life. The line between human fiction and reality seemed impossibly blurred. As the probe continued its mission, its certainty about humanity began to waver. These creatures defied every model of alien behavior in the Kethvari databases. They were primitive yet sophisticated, violent yet compassionate, logical yet driven by emotions that the probe could not quantify. Seeker Prime had been designed to analyze and categorize alien species quickly and efficiently. But after days of observation, it was no closer to understanding humanity than when it had arrived. The probe's confusion grew deeper with each passing day. Seeker Prime had expanded its observation to include smaller human settlements, hoping that rural communities might reveal simpler, more logical behavior patterns. Instead, it found even more puzzling examples of human nature. In a small farming town in Iowa, the probe watched an elderly farmer named Bob Chen spend 3 hours helping his neighbor fix a broken tractor. The neighbor, Jim Walsh, had been feuding with Bob for months over a property line dispute. Yet when Jim's equipment failed during harvest season, Bob immediately offered assistance without being asked. The probe's analytical system struggled to process this interaction. According to all known behavioral models, competing individuals should exploit each other's weaknesses, not provide aid. The probe replayed the scene multiple times, searching for hidden motives or advantages that Bob might gain from helping his rival. Dr. Paul Martinez had assembled a team of the world's best scientists to study the invisible visitor. The group now included Dr. Lisa Thompson from Arecibo, Dr. Karen White, a psychologist from Harvard who specialized in contact scenarios, and Dr. Sam Taylor, a physicist from CERN who understood exotic matter. "We've been thinking about this all wrong," Dr. Karen White said during their daily briefing. "We keep trying to detect this object directly, but what if we focus on what it's doing rather than where it is?" Dr. Sam Taylor nodded thoughtfully. "The gravitational anomalies suggest it's studying our planet systematically, moving from region to region in a logical pattern. Like a tourist following a guidebook," Paul added. But what kind of guidebook would an alien intelligence use? The probe was indeed following a pattern, but not one that any human guidebook would recommend. It had begun focusing on examples of human conflict resolution, trying to understand how this species managed to survive despite their apparent inability to follow logical behavioral rules. In Rwanda, the probe observed a remarkable phenomenon. Humans who had been enemies during a terrible conflict 25 years earlier were now working together to build schools and hospitals. The probe studied the records of the 1994 genocide, then watched former enemies share meals and care for each other's children. This violated every principle of post-conflict behavior in the probe's database. Most species either eliminated their enemies completely or maintained permanent hostility. Humans seemed capable of something the probe had never encountered: genuine forgiveness. Tony Rodriguez crouched behind a damaged wall in Syria, his squad pinned down by enemy fire. The young soldier had been in the army for 3 years, but this was his first real combat deployment. Bullets whined overhead as his sergeant planned their next move. "Rodriguez, that building across the street is collapsing," Sergeant Martinez shouted over the gunfire. "I can see civilians trapped inside. Tony looked at the building. Smoke poured from its windows, and part of the roof had already fallen in. Getting to those civilians would mean crossing 50 meters of open ground under enemy fire. "Those aren't our people, Sarge," one of the other soldiers said. "Could be hostiles for all we know." Sergeant Martinez checked his ammunition. "Doesn't matter. They're people." The probe witnessed this conversation through its advanced sensors, recording every word and analyzing every decision. When the American soldiers risked their lives to rescue civilians from the collapsing building, the probe's behavioral prediction algorithms crashed completely. 3 of the rescued civilians turned out to be elderly grandparents and a young child. They had no military value, no strategic importance, and no connection to the American forces. Yet the soldiers had risked everything to save them. Dr. Amy Foster and Ryan Clark had made a breakthrough in tracking the internet anomalies. They discovered that the mysterious observer was not just copying human data randomly, it was specifically focusing on human stories and cultural products. "Look at this pattern," Amy said, pointing to her computer screen. "It's accessing literature databases, film archives, music libraries, and social media posts. But it's ignoring technical manuals, scientific papers, and government documents." Ryan frowned at the data. "It's like something is trying to understand human culture rather than human technology." "But why would anyone want to understand our culture without caring about our capabilities?" Amy wondered. The probe was asking itself the same question. Its original mission was to assess humanity's military threat level and technological advancement. But the more it learned about human culture, the more it realized that these factors might be irrelevant. Human military capabilities were indeed primitive by galactic standards. Their most powerful weapons could barely destroy a single city. Their fastest spacecraft moved like crawling insects compared to Kethavari vessels. By every objective measure, humanity posed no threat to the Empire. Yet the probe had observed something that troubled its analytical systems. Humans consistently achieved impossible victories through methods that defied strategic logic. The probe studied historical human conflicts, accessing digital archives and recorded accounts. At Thermopylae, 300 Spartan warriors had held off a vastly superior Persian army. Military analysis suggested this should have been impossible, yet it had happened. During World War II, the defenders of Stalingrad had endured months of siege that should have broken any rational army. Instead, they fought harder as conditions became worse. The probe could find no logical explanation for this behavior. In Vietnam, a technologically superior military force had been defeated by farmers using primitive weapons and guerrilla tactics. The probe's strategic models could not account for how an outgunned force had maintained morale and determination against overwhelming odds. Admiral Grace Peterson sat in the Pentagon's most secure briefing room, studying reports from around the world. As head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, she had been informed about the invisible visitor within hours of its detection. "What are we dealing with?" she asked the assembled experts. Dr. Jake Collins presented his team's findings. "Based on its behavior, we believe this is an unmanned reconnaissance probe. It's studying our planet systematically, but it seems more interested in observing than interfering." "What's it looking for?" Admiral Peterson asked. "That's the strange part," Jake replied. "If this was a military reconnaissance mission, we'd expect it to focus on our weapons, our defenses, our strategic capabilities. Instead, it seems fascinated by human behavior and culture." Captain Rodriguez, Tony's older brother, had been assigned to lead a covert team tracking the probe's movements. Miguel Rodriguez was a Navy SEAL with experience in unconventional warfare. His team used advanced sensors to detect the probe's gravitational effects and electromagnetic emissions. "We can predict where it's going to appear next," Miguel reported to Admiral Peterson. "It follows population centers, but it also spends time in rural areas and conflict zones, like it's conducting a comprehensive study of human society." The probe was indeed conducting such a study, and the results were breaking its analytical frameworks. In Afghanistan, it watched American and British soldiers share their rations with local children who had been taught to hate them. In Israel and Palestine, it observed teachers on both sides secretly working together to educate children about peace. Every example of human behavior seemed to contradict the previous one. Humans were capable of terrible violence, yet they created institutions dedicated to preventing violence. They competed fiercely for resources, yet they shared those resources with strangers who could never repay them. The probe attempted to understand human warfare by studying a heated argument between two neighbors in suburban Ohio. Frank Peterson and Danny Adams had been feuding over a property line for 3 years. Their argument had escalated to legal threats and public accusations. The probe positioned itself to observe what it expected would be a typical territorial dispute. Its sensors recorded the shouting match between the two humans, noting the elevated stress responses and aggressive posturing. Then something happened that made the probe's behavioral prediction systems crash again. Danny Adams collapsed from a heart attack in the middle of the argument. Without hesitation, Frank Peterson dropped his hostility and administered first aid while calling for medical assistance. For the next week, Frank brought meals to Danny's family and helped care for his livestock. The property dispute was never mentioned again. When Danny recovered, the two former enemies had become close friends. The probe replayed this sequence hundreds of times, trying to understand the decision-making process that had caused Frank to switch from antagonist to caregiver in seconds. No rational analysis could explain this behavior. Dr. Karen White had been studying contact scenarios for most of her career. She understood better than most people how alien contact might unfold, but the current situation was unlike anything she had imagined. "We're dealing with an intelligence that's trying to understand us," she told the assembled team. "The question is, what conclusions is it reaching?" Dr. Sam Taylor looked up from his calculations. Based on its movement patterns and observation time, this probe has collected more data about human civilization than we have about ourselves. It knows things about our behavior that we don't even know. "And then what?" Paul asked. "What does it do with that information?" The probe's neural networks began showing signs of severe strain. Warning signals flashed through its crystalline consciousness as it tried to process the impossible data streaming from human society. Seeker Prime had analyzed thousands of alien civilizations, but humanity was breaking every behavioral model in its vast databases. Dr. Lisa Thompson and Dr. Frank Wilson had finally pinpointed the probe's location using a new gravitational detection array. The invisible visitor was currently positioned above a small town in Kansas, apparently studying the local population with intense focus. "We need to coordinate with military forces," Frank said, reviewing the tracking data. "If we can predict its exact position, maybe we can establish communication." General Mike Santos was already mobilizing specialized units. The veteran officer had served in conflicts around the world, but this situation required entirely new protocols. How do you communicate with something you can't see from a species you don't understand? The probe was watching the town of Millerville, Kansas, population 2,847. A devastating tornado had struck 3 days earlier, destroying half the buildings and killing 17 people. The probe expected to observe typical post-disaster behavior: resource hoarding, territorial disputes, and social breakdown under stress. Instead, it witnessed something that overloaded its analytical systems completely. Nina Clark, a paramedic from the neighboring county, had been working 18-hour shifts. Since the tornado hit, she had volunteered to help despite having no official obligation to this community. Her own family needed her at home, and she wasn't being paid for her time. Yet she continued treating injured strangers with the same care she would give her own children. The probe recorded Nina working on a construction worker who had been trapped under debris for 6 hours. The man was unconscious and would never know who saved his life. Nina spent 3 hours performing delicate surgery in a damaged hospital with failing equipment. When she finally stabilized him, she moved immediately to the next patient without key. The probe's logic circuits could not reconcile this behavior with any survival strategy. Nina gained nothing from helping these strangers. Her actions put her own health and family welfare at risk. Yet she continued working with a dedication that seemed to increase rather than decrease as her exhaustion grew. Dr. Amy Foster had assembled an international team of linguists, anthropologists, and computer scientists to study the probe's data collection patterns. They had discovered something remarkable. The visitor was specifically focusing on examples of human cooperation and self-sacrifice. "It's not just studying our culture randomly," Amy explained to her colleagues. "It's trying to understand why humans help each other, especially when it costs them something personally." Dr. Susan Patel from Stanford nodded. "The probe has accessed millions of historical records about human altruism. Stories of people risking their lives for strangers, sharing resources with competitors, caring for enemies. It's like someone trying to solve a puzzle they can't understand." The probe was indeed trying to solve a puzzle. Its advanced intelligence could predict the behavior of gas giants, calculate the trajectories of entire star systems, and analyze the social structures of countless alien species. But it could not understand why a human would give their last piece of food to a hungry child they had never met. Lieutenant Colonel Ashley Barnes led a special forces team to the probe's approximate location. Her unit was equipped with the most advanced detection equipment the military possessed, but they still could not see their target directly. "Command, we're in position," Ashley reported over her encrypted radio. "We can detect gravitational anomalies, consistent with a large object directly overhead, but visual confirmation is impossible. Maintain position and observe," came the reply. "Do not attempt direct contact without authorization." What Ashley's team didn't know was that the probe was experiencing a critical system failure. Its attempt to analyze the tornado recovery had triggered cascading errors throughout its consciousness. The probe was simultaneously trying to observe human behavior and predict human responses, but the two data sets were incompatible. The probe watched 12-year-old Kevin Martinez helping elderly Mrs. Patterson clean debris from her destroyed home. Kevin's own house had been damaged, and his family needed his help. Yet he spent every afternoon after school working for a woman who could offer him nothing in return, except a glass of lemonade and a tired smile. The probe tried to model Kevin's decision-making process. Children in most species focused entirely on their own survival and the survival of their immediate family group. Helping unrelated adults served no biological or social purpose. Yet Kevin seemed to gain genuine satisfaction from his work, even though it brought him no tangible benefit. The probe's behavioral prediction algorithms crashed when it tried to process this data. Every attempt to categorize Kevin's actions resulted in logical contradictions that spiraled through the probe's neural networks like a virus. Dr. Karen White had been studying the psychological profiles of the probe's target communities. She noticed a pattern that both fascinated and worried her. The probe is focusing on situations where humans make irrational decisions based on moral principles, she told the research team. It's studying examples of people who act against their own self-interest to help others. "That could be dangerous," Dr. Sam Taylor replied. "If an alien intelligence concludes that humans are predictably irrational, it might see us as easy to manipulate or control, or it might conclude that we're too unpredictable to safely interact with," Karen added. The probe was reaching a similar conclusion, but from a different angle. Its analysis of human military history had revealed a terrifying pattern. Humans became more dangerous when they stopped caring about their own survival. The probe studied the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of 1943. A small group of poorly armed humans had fought against impossible odds knowing they could not win. Military logic suggested they should have surrendered to preserve their lives. Instead, they had fought harder as their situation became more hopeless. Similar patterns appeared throughout human history. At the Alamo, defenders had chosen death over surrender. During the Battle of Britain, pilots had flown mission after mission against overwhelming enemy forces. In each case, humans had become more effective fighters as victory became less likely. The probe's strategic analysis systems could not account for this behavior. Most species fought harder when they had advantages and surrendered when defeat was certain. Humans seemed to operate according to the opposite principle. Captain Miguel Rodriguez and his SEAL team had been tracking the probe for 3 weeks. They had developed techniques for predicting its movements and had successfully positioned themselves near its observation points several times. "The pattern is consistent," Miguel reported to Admiral Peterson. It spends the most time observing humans in crisis situations, natural disasters, conflicts, medical emergencies, like it's studying how we respond under pressure. What's it learning? The Admiral asked. That's what worries me, Miguel replied. Every crisis situation shows humans acting in ways that defy military logic. We sacrifice for strangers. We share resources with enemies. We fight harder when we're losing. From a strategic perspective, our behavior makes no sense. The probe was reaching the same conclusion. It attempted one final analysis by studying a children's hospital in Detroit. The probe expected to find a simple resource allocation system, medical care provided in exchange for payment. Instead, it discovered Dr. Rachel Kim, a pediatric surgeon who treated children regardless of their family's ability to pay. She worked 16-hour days, took no vacations, and often paid for her patients' medications from her own salary. When the probe analyzed her financial records, it found that she could have earned 3 times as much money in private practice. The probe tried to understand Dr. Kim's motivation by observing her interactions with patients. It recorded her spending hours comforting a dying child, reading stories to scared toddlers, and celebrating with families when surgeries succeeded. The emotional responses suggested she gained satisfaction from her work, but the satisfaction was not correlated with financial reward. When the probe attempted to model this behavior, its prediction system suffered a complete breakdown. The concept of work satisfaction divorced from personal gain was incompatible with every behavioral framework in its databases. The probe began broadcasting a continuous distress signal, not to its creators, but seemingly to itself. Its crystalline consciousness was fragmenting under the weight of incomprehensible data. Dr. Frank Wilson detected the distress signal first. It's broadcasting on multiple frequencies simultaneously, he reported to the research team. The signal pattern suggests severe system instability. Is it trying to communicate with us? Paul Martinez asked. No, Frank replied, studying the data stream. I think it's trying to communicate with itself, like it's attempting to restart its own systems after a critical failure. The probe's final analytical attempt focused on human children, hoping that younger humans might display more predictable behavior patterns. It observed a kindergarten class in Seattle, watching 5-year-old children interact during playtime. The probe expected to see competition for resources, territorial behavior. The probe's departure began without warning. Dr. Paul Martinez was monitoring the gravitational sensors when the reading suddenly shifted. After 3 months of methodical observation, the invisible visitor was finally leaving Earth. It's moving, Paul called out to his team. Trajectory suggests it's heading back toward the outer solar system. Dr. Lisa Thompson quickly calculated the probe's course. Same vector as its arrival. Whatever it came here to do, I think it's finished. Seeker Prime accelerated away from Earth, its damaged consciousness struggling to process the massive data files it had collected. The probe's crystalline mind was no longer the precise analytical instrument that had departed the Kethvari fleet months earlier. Something fundamental had changed during its time observing humanity. Commander Zexthul stood on the bridge of his flagship, waiting for the probe's return. Around him, his crew prepared to receive and analyze Seeker Prime's report. The commander expected a routine assessment, military capabilities, technological level, social structure, and recommended action for the Empire. Commander, we're receiving Seeker Prime's initial transmission, reported Officer Vexmar. The first data burst contained a single word repeated in over 7,000 human languages. Impossible. The word echoed through the ship's communication systems in English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, Hindi, and thousands of other human tongues. Zexthul frowned at this unexpected beginning. Display the threat assessment data. The probe's detailed files began arriving, petabytes of information, about human civilization, but instead of the expected military analysis, the data consisted of behavioral observations that made no sense to the Kethvari. The probe transmitted footage of humans risking their lives to save strangers during natural disasters. It showed soldiers sharing their rations with enemy civilians. It displayed scientists working for decades on problems that would benefit people they would never meet. This cannot be accurate, Zexthul muttered, watching the data stream. No species behaves this way. Officer Vexmar attempted to process the probe's analysis. Commander, the probe's threat assessment protocols appear to have malfunctioned. It cannot classify human military capabilities because it cannot predict human behavior during conflict. Dr. Paul Martinez led an international team monitoring the probe's departure. They had successfully tracked its trajectory toward a massive fleet position just beyond Pluto's orbit. Earth's first confirmation that humanity was not alone in the universe had arrived in the form of a damaged spy probe fleeing their planet. "We need to send a message," Dr. Karen White suggested during an emergency briefing with world leaders. "If there's an alien fleet out there, they need to know that we detected their probe." Admiral Grace Peterson coordinated the response. Captain Jake Collins supervised the technical aspects of humanity's first intentional communication with an alien intelligence. The message was simple and direct. "We know you're out there. We know you've been watching. We're not afraid, but we'd prefer to be friends." The probe received this transmission as it approached the Kethavari fleet. For the first time in its existence, Seeker Prime made a decision that contradicted its programming. Instead of simply delivering the human message to its creators, it began analyzing the implications of those words. Humans knew they had been observed. They knew a superior military force was nearby. Yet their response was not fear or aggression, but an offer of friendship. The probe's damaged logic systems could barely process this final paradox. Commander Zexthul grew increasingly agitated as more data arrived from the probe. The files contained human music that somehow convinced even alien minds that beauty could exist without purpose. They included human literature that celebrated sacrifice and love over power and conquest. They showed human children playing games where everyone could win and no one had to lose. "This is clearly malfunctioned data," Zexthul declared to his crew. No species could survive with such behavioral patterns. But the probe's technical logs were clear. Humans had not only survived, they had thrived. Despite their tendency toward irrational altruism, they had developed complex civilizations, advanced technology, and global cooperation networks. The probe attempted to deliver its formal threat assessment, but its analysis subroutines could only generate recursive errors. How do you classify a species that makes decisions based on abstract moral principles rather than survival advantage? How do you predict the behavior of beings who consider dying for strangers the highest form of victory? Officer Vexmar studied the probe's behavioral analysis files. "Commander, according to this data, humans become more dangerous when they stop caring about their own survival. Their military effectiveness increases in proportion to their willingness to sacrifice themselves for others." This concept was beyond the Kethavari understanding of warfare. In every conflict the Empire had witnessed, victory went to those who preserved their own forces while destroying their enemies. Human warfare seemed to operate according to opposite principles. The probe transmitted its final observation, footage, of human children in schools around the world. The probe had studied these young humans extensively, trying to understand how their species passed knowledge to the next generation. Human children were taught that kindness mattered more than victory. They learned stories where heroes won through cooperation rather than conquest. They were encouraged to dream of impossible futures where all beings could live in peace and prosperity. Most alien species taught their young to compete, to dominate, to take what they needed from weaker beings. Humans taught their children to share, to help, to care for those who could not help themselves. Commander Zexthul realized with growing horror that these were not malfunctioned readings. The probe was accurately reporting on a species that operated according to principles the Kethavari had never encountered. "Sir," Officer Vexmar said quietly, "I recommend immediate withdrawal." "Withdrawal?" Zexthul turned to stare at his subordinate. "From a primitive species that has barely left their home planet? Sir, if this data is accurate, humans represent something more dangerous than any weapon system. They possess ideas that could spread to our own populations. Concepts of self-sacrifice, altruism, and cooperation that could destabilize the Empire's entire social structure." The probe's final transmission was not a military assessment or a strategic recommendation. Instead, It broadcast a collection of human music, art, and stories. The transmission included a children's lullaby sung by a mother in Syria, a poem written by a soldier in Afghanistan, and a painting created by a refugee child who had lost everything but still believed in beauty. These simple human creations did something that no weapon in the Kethvari arsenal could accomplish. They made the alien crew question their own way of life. If beings as primitive as humans could create such beauty while enduring such hardship, what did that say about the Empire's philosophy of conquest and domination? The probe fell silent as it approached the fleet, its systems overwhelmed by the paradox of humanity. Seeker Prime had been designed to analyze and categorize alien species with perfect efficiency, but humanity had broken every category and shattered every assumption. Commander Zex Thul made a decision that would puzzle Kethvari historians for generations. He ordered the entire fleet to withdraw from the solar system without firing a single shot. The Empire's most powerful armada retreated from a species that had no idea they were in danger. "Why are we retreating, Commander?" Officer Vexmar asked. Zex Thul stared at the probe's final transmission data. "Because we cannot conquer hope. We cannot destroy dreams. And we cannot defeat a species that considers love more powerful than fear." The probe remained in Earth's orbit permanently silent. Its crystalline consciousness had been shattered by its encounter with humanity. In its final moments of awareness, it had been trying to understand why humans sang while they worked, even when no one was listening. Years later, Dr. Amy Foster led the international team studying the probe's remains. They discovered that its final computational processes had been dedicated to analyzing a simple human behavior, the tendency to hum or whistle during routine tasks. The probe had never found an answer to this puzzle. It could not understand why beings would create music for no audience except themselves. But in searching for that answer, it had learned something that no artificial intelligence was designed to comprehend: the simple, terrifying beauty of being human. The probe's legacy was not the data it collected or the analysis it provided. Instead, it became a monument to the day an entire galactic empire discovered that some things in the universe are too dangerous to conquer. Not because they are strong, but because they are beautiful. Not because they threaten with weapons, but because they inspire with hope. Humanity never learned how close they had come to invasion. They never discovered that their simple nature had defeated an empire that had conquered 1,000 worlds. They continued living their impossible lives, singing while they worked, helping strangers without reward, and believing that tomorrow could always be better than today. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, the word impossible echoed through the void in 7,000 human languages, a whisper of wonder that would outlast empires and endure until the last star burned cold in an empty,